Hi, I'm Scott Solomon. You know, as a scientist and world traveler, I spend a lot of time on the road. And I wanted to share with you an app that can make that time more exciting, educational, and more interactive than your typical audiobook or podcast. Except for this one, of course. It's called Autio. That's A-U-T-I-O. And what it does is it uses GPS to follow your location, and then it gives you audio stories about the places that you're driving by. These stories are told by some of the best storytellers out there, like John Lithgow, Phil Jackson, Kevin Costner, and many others. The stories are short, usually about 3 to 5 minutes long, and they play for you as you drive. Or, if you prefer, you can plan a road trip and then find stories about those places to inspire you before you leave. And Autio's library of stories celebrate every voice and perspective. Rooted in curiosity, the storytelling embraces the diversity of cultures, people, and places that you discover along your travels, just like we do here on Wild World. Stories are updated and added every week, so no two journeys are ever the same. Now you can check out the Autio app through a link on our website, wildworldshow.com, or in the podcast show notes. And by doing so, you'll also help our podcast to continue to bring you explorations of the natural wonders of the world and the voices of the people who explore, study, and protect them. Our world was once filled with giant animals, from dinosaurs and mammoths to woolly rhinos and giant ground sloths. Most of these giants have gone extinct, but if you go to the right place, you can still find one or two giants living today.
I got my first image, and that image actually changed my life completely. I could not believe what I was seeing. I could not believe that this gigantic prehistoric species had been living under my feet for all these years, and I had never seen it.
Woo! This is Wild World. I'm Scott Solomon. In today's episode, we're exploring a place home to many wild animals. Some that are readily seen, and others that are so elusive, even the wildlife biologists who live and work there almost never encounter them. Picture a wild place in South America. Maybe you're thinking of a rainforest with towering trees and wide-flowing rivers. Or perhaps you're picturing an Andean mountain topped with ice and snow, where alpacas roam and condors soar. Or a windswept Patagonian grassland. But right in the middle of the continent is a place that is one of the wildest places of all. One that's home to a tremendous amount of wildlife. And it might just be the best place to go if you want to see some of the most iconic species of South American animals. Jaguars, capybaras, caiman, toucans, and macaws. It's a place called the Pantanal. At more than 42 million acres, the Pantanal is the world's largest tropical wetland. It spans parts of 3 countries, Paraguay, Bolivia, and Brazil. If you visit the Pantanal, depending on the time of year, you may find open plains dotted with small green patches of forest, with water found mostly in the rivers that wind their way through the area. But when the rains come, those rivers spill out over the plains, covering them in water. For aquatic creatures like fish, caiman, and otters, the floods provide a wealth of habitat. But land animals have to seek higher ground. The local ranchers relocate their cattle during the high water season, leaving much of the Pantanal as a wilderness, the perfect place for biologists to come and study the remarkable creatures that live here. My guest for this episode studies some of the more mysterious and enigmatic animals of the Pantanal. Dr. Arnaud Desbiez is a biologist who's originally from France, but has lived in Brazil for more than 15 years, where he works to study and protect animals in the Pantanal. He's the founder of the Institute for the Conservation of Wild Animals, also known as ICAS. Arnaud has worked closely with our friends at the Houston Zoo, which has an exhibit on the Pantanal. Arnaud's work in the Pantanal has focused on two species that are absolutely fascinating: giant anteaters and giant armadillos. Arnaud Desbiez, thank you so much for being on Wild World.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Scott.
So you work in this amazing area of South America called the Pantanal, and it's a place that I've been a few times, and I'm always amazed by it because, I mean, it's really famous as this wildlife mecca, right? I mean, it's a place that people can go to see these amazing species of South American animals, things like jaguars and caiman and some spectacular birds like hyacinth macaws, and of course it's really good for fishing too. That's something that brings a lot of people there. But one of the animals that you work with is a species that I have actually never seen, despite having lived in Brazil and worked in Brazil and spent a lot of time out in wild places, and that is the giant armadillo. They are pretty rare, I take it.
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. Few people have ever seen a giant armadillo. And even in the ranch where we started the project, the owner of the ranch, Rita, she was born in this ranch. It was her father's. She had lived there her whole life, and she runs the ranch now. And yeah, I think she was over 50 years old, and she had never seen a giant armadillo before we started the project. And her brother, who was almost 80 years old, her older brother, and he had never seen a giant armadillo either before. So this is a really rare species that occurs throughout South America. They're basically found from Venezuela to northern Argentina, everything east of the Andes. And the Pantanal is paradise for giant armadillos because it's one of the rare tropical ecosystems where man lives in a sustainable way.
Yeah, I mean, one of my first reactions the first time I visited the Pantanal was it wasn't actually what I was expecting. In my mind, I had pictured this kind of pristine Garden of Eden type place, but actually a lot of it is ranch land. It actually reminded me a lot of parts of Texas near where I live.
Absolutely, exactly. And so the Pantanal, well, just for our listeners, just to situate it, it's found in the center of the South American continent. A little bit of the Pantanal is in Bolivia and Paraguay, but most of it is found in Brazil. And so the Pantanal is the world's largest freshwater wetland. And so it's very, very flat. You kind of have to imagine a plate. And you have the Cerrado around it that's higher up. And then the Pantanal is just a very flat area where the water from the Cerrado kind of drains down to the Paraguay River. So it's an environment of very extreme variation in climates. We have a flooded season, a dry season that are very extreme. So when it's flooded, everything gets flooded. During the dry season, everything's very dry. And yes, you're absolutely right. The Pantanal looks like a Garden of Eden, but in fact, over 95% of the Pantanal is privately owned and divided in these large cattle ranches. And when I say large, it's very large. Thousands and thousands of hectares. They can be between 40,000 hectares. But it's basically a mosaic of different habitats. And you have these large areas of grasslands which flood annually. So there's lots of native grass for the cows to forage on. And it's interesting because in Brazil, in this region, we don't have a mega herbivore. If you look at the African plains, every blade of grass has a different species eating it, depending on its size, etc. In the Pantanal, we have the capybaras, right, which are these large rodents. So there was an ecological niche that the cattle was able to fulfill. And, so there's been cattle ranching in the Pantanal for the last 250 years. And up until recently, it was fairly sustainable. And so you can say that the Pantanal is, one of the few examples in our world of a tropical ecosystem in which man lives and that is economically sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting. And I guess if you're a cattle rancher that's working and living in the Pantanal, I mean, I imagine that during the wet season when it's flooded, you gotta move your cattle elsewhere. Is that right? They use those pastures like when the water levels go down?
Well, so it depends. There are different regions in the Pantanal. There are some regions like in the south, Nabilec, where the floods are, yes, very intense, and they have to move their cattle annually. But other areas, for example, where we work in Niecolândia, it just means that there is less pasture available, and there's these patches of forest all over. And so when it gets really flooded, the cattle can go into the forest. And so they can move around. But that is what I love about the Pantanal. It's such a diversity. There are plants from lots of other ecosystems. Sometimes the Pantanal is like a melting pot of vegetation from the neighboring Amazon, Atlantic forest, Cerrado, Chaco. And so everything depends on just a couple of inches, right? And so if the soil is a little bit higher, usually it's soil that drains really a lot. So if it's like a foot or two higher, then that'll become a dry area. So you can have cactuses. And then right next to that, you'll have palm trees from the Amazon. So it's this huge melting pot diversity. Some people laugh and say that the Pantanal has no personality. It's a big mixture of all kinds of trees and this big melting pot. But I like to see it, as the big melting pot. And that also is found in the fauna. So the Pantanal doesn't have a lot of endemism. I think there's like a rodent, but there's no real species that are endemic to the Pantanal, which means that are only found there. Whereas the Cerrado, no. There are a lot of species that are only found in the Cerrado. However, what is striking in the Pantanal is the diversity and the large populations. So, these species that are really rare in other biomes, such as jaguars, giant anteaters, giant otters, pampas deer, marsh deer, all these species that are hard to find or rare in other areas are found in large, healthy populations in the Pantanal. And so it's a wonderful place to visit.
And that is what brings a lot of visitors, right? I mean, people go to see wildlife. I mean, it's really the place that I think a lot of people think about the Amazon as the place that is home to South American wildlife. But as you said, there's a lot of the same species, but I guess partly because it's a more open habitat and because they have those healthy populations, it's often easier to see Amazonian species in the Pantanal, right?
Absolutely. So if you go to the Amazon, you'll be stricken by the size of the trees and it's like being in the cathedral of nature. And you'll see butterflies, a few monkeys and birds, but it'll be really hard to see the big mammals. Also because, you can't really see very far away. Whereas if you're in the Pantanal, it's as close as you can get to the African savanna kind of experience where you can really see lots of different species. And so actually, I think more and more people are learning about the Pantanal, but the Pantanal is still kind of a well-kept secret. Not that many people know about it. So when people come to Brazil, for example, they want to go to Rio de Janeiro, the Amazon, maybe the Iguaçu Falls, Salvador. So the ranch Bahia das Pedras, where we work in the Niecolândia region, they have a small ecotourism facility. They have 6 rooms. And you can see that the people that come are really these very passionate people that like to step off the beaten track, right? I mean, it has huge potential for tourism, but I don't think there's the levels of tourism that there should or could be.
Yeah. And, like you say, like this wildlife that you can see there and have a pretty good chance of seeing there is incredible. And your chances of seeing these things really are, quite good. In my few visits I've made there, I haven't seen a jaguar there yet, but I've seen quite a few of the other large, amazing animals. But as I said, the one thing I haven't seen anywhere is a giant armadillo. I have to admit, when I first learned about giant armadillos, I thought they were fake, or I thought they were like an extinct species. I'm embarrassed as a biologist that I didn't initially know when I first started working in South America that such a thing still lived on our planet. This is Wild World. I'm Scott Solomon. I'm talking with Arnaud Desbiez. When we come back, we'll hear more about some of the amazing animals that live in the Pantanal and the way that Arnaud Desbiez is working to help understand and protect them.
To support this Wild World podcast, please check out Autio. It's an app that gives you amazing stories told by some of the world's best storytellers, such as John Lithgow, Phil Jackson, and Kevin Costner, and it's uniquely curated based on your location. It's a perfect audio travel companion for any road trip or just learning more about a trip you want to take. Click on the link in our show notes for more information.
You're listening to Wild World. I'm Scott Solomon. My guest today is Arnaud Desbiez, a wildlife biologist and conservationist that works in South America's Pantanal.
Just talk a little bit about giant armadillos. I mean, for one thing, how giant are they?
Okay, so here we go. It's going to be very hard for me to talk about anything else because giant armadillos have become an obsession of mine. Well, giant armadillos are giants. They are 5 feet from the tip of their nose to the tip of their tail. They weigh about 80 pounds, kind of the size of a Labrador retriever. And as you said, this is a species that is not well known by the general public. Many people think the species has gone extinct, that it doesn't exist anymore. And yet, giant armadillos have a wide distribution. They're found in 11 countries in South America, in lots of different habitats and biomes. They can be found in the wet Amazon, the dry Cerrado, the extremely dry Chaco. So they're found in this diversity of habitats, but yet always at very low population density. So this is a species that is naturally rare. And it's nocturnal. They spend their day deep underground in their large burrows, and then they come out at night for on average about 5 hours to eat ants and termites. And one of the characteristics and one of the most striking features when you look at a giant armadillo is on their third finger digit, they have this huge claw, which is 15 centimeters. It's larger than the claw of a polar bear.
Wow, that's amazing.
So they have this really large claw that they use to break open termite mounds that are hard as rock, dig ant nests, because they feed mainly on ants and termites. And then they use their back paws to kind of scoop up that sand and dig. And so as all armadillos, you'll see they have this characteristic armor on their back. An amazing species. And I had been living and working in the Pantanal for 8 years, and I had never seen a giant armadillo. And my wife, who works with tapirs, was working at the Bahia das Pedras ranch. I was working another project. And one day she came home after one expedition and she said, "My God, you're never going to believe what I saw." They were out searching for tapirs very early in the morning and they saw a giant armadillo. And this was my dream species. I've always loved armadillos. I've always dreamed of seeing one. And so I got permission from the owners of the ranch to go to Bahia das Pedras, and I just installed some camera traps and I searched around. And first it was a little bit hard. The owner of the ranch and the cowboys had to help me to find these giant armadillo burrows because they themselves knew nothing about giant armadillos. It's a nocturnal species. Everybody works during the day. They had never seen one. And so after about 3 months, I got my first image of a giant armadillo. And that picture, that image actually changed my life completely. I could not believe what I was seeing. I could not believe that this gigantic prehistoric species had been living under my feet for all these years and I had never seen it. And when I looked in the literature, there was almost nothing about it, just anecdotal stories. And I said, you know what? This is what I want to dedicate my life to this species. This is what I want to do. And so this was in 2010, just being one man in the middle of the Pantanal with just a few camera traps. It's been a whole adventure and long story that we're now an NGO. I've founded an NGO called the ICAS, Instituto de Conservação de Animais Silvestres, the Wild Animal Conservation Institute. We have 23 full-time staff working on giant armadillos and giant anteaters, 5 interns, and at the moment 7 students between master's, PhD, and postdocs.
That's amazing. I
And-
mean, it's
so-
like you've really come a long way. And I have to admit, I do feel a little bit better that I'm not the only one that has spent time there and not seen giant armadillos for a long time. So thank you. Can you give me a little bit of a sense of like, how do you study a species that's so elusive? So you mentioned camera traps and
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about that. So that's like a motion activated camera that you leave out in a wild area, right?
Yes, and now these modern camera traps. So there's a sensor and it will register in the card the data digitally. So it's not like when I started the Pantanal in 2000, it was on film, right? So you had, the animal go, you'd have a film, you had to wait for the, 36 pictures to be taken. And Pantanal is very remote. So for me, it takes a whole day to get out of the field, right? And then you have to bring it to the shop, wait for it to be delivered, and you're like, woohoo. Now, no. So that when I said for the giant armadillo, it's all digital, right? So the animal goes, and so the cameras have batteries, and you can leave them for almost 2 months, taking all these images, and so they're really your eyes and even ears because they can record sound. There's video now, so they can really be your eyes and ears in the field and detect things that you would never see. I got this amazing picture of a giant armadillo and the detail, it was so good that it was just amazing.
That's awesome. So what are some of the other techniques that you use for studying giant armadillos?
Yeah. So how do we work with giant armadillos now? So we still use camera traps. And I wish I could tell you, okay, this is what you do. But the truth is we have become much better trackers. We understand better how to read the signs giant armadillos leave, but it's still searching for a needle in a haystack. And so we know that there's some habitats that they prefer. And so we search in those areas, but it's a lot of searching. And then we work mostly during the day, and the trick is to find an animal in its burrow. And you know that an animal is in its burrow because when they dig down, they throw sand in front of the burrow and they close the entrance of the burrow. Because you see, these burrows, they will abandon usually after 1 or 2 nights, and they will dig another one. They have really huge home ranges, 25 square kilometers. So they'll stay underground at night, then they go at night to feed, sometimes come back, or they go dig another burrow. And they dig these really deep burrows in just 15, 20 minutes. And so our goal, if we want to capture giant armadillo, is to find one that's in its burrow. And then we have this huge trap made out of steel called a jequi. And this is a traditional trap that was used by indigenous people to capture smaller armadillos. So it's a trap that they go in and can't come out of. So we've adapted that system. And so we have this huge funnel. And the entrance, there's one way out and one way in. So if it's inside, we put the jequi, the trap in it. And then there's just this little door that kind of hangs, and then a piece of string. And so when the animal walks in and knocks over the string, the door closes. That will emit, we'll put a little transmitter, and we'll be waiting far away, and we'll hear a signal. We come, we remove the animal from the trap. We put in this gigantic wooden box, and then wait for it so then it'll relax. It'll be sleeping. Next morning, we'll open the box. We'll find it sleeping. And then we'll start a procedure where we'll put an implant in the animal. So a small device, telemetry device. We perform a small surgery, intra-abdominal, put the device inside, and that will help us to track the animal. And so then we use the technique of telemetry. And now because this is an intra-abdominal implant, the distance is not very big, and the home ranges of these animals are huge. And so what we also do is we use a little GPS tag that we put on the armor of the animal, but that will always fall off after 30 to maybe 50 days. But the GPS tracker is really cool because the GPS will register in the tracker the exact position that the animal was in. And so we can get all its movement during the night. And so between these two techniques of the implants, we'll find the animal where it's sleeping during the day, but then the tracker will let us understand where it forages and everything else. And so thanks to that, we've been able to learn much more about the biology, ecology, everything about the giant armadillo. So giant armadillos, it's interesting because what our work in the Pantanal shows is that they need the forest, actually. That's where they dig their burrows, but that's where they forage a lot. And that's also when they breed, when they have their pups, it will always be in a forested area. Travel, they will use open areas to travel. One of their favorite places to forage is called the Murundu, and that's like a small island of vegetation. So if you're studying ants, that's probably a place to go. It's kind of like just a couple of meters in diameter with typically a termite mound and cerrado vegetation. And these kind of little islands of vegetation, they love to forage there. So that was really important for us to document that because that's very important for their survival. And that's the exact habitat. That's the first habitat that gets removed sometimes by landowners when they want to increase the capacity for their cattle. They'll just say, there's flooded pasture and then these little dotted islands. They don't consider that forest. So they remove those. So it's really important for giant armadillos, but also for some species of birds and insects and reptiles. And so there's a lot of biodiversity going in these murundus. So that the giant armadillos have helped us to learn about that.
That's really cool. Now, you mentioned a giant armadillo pup. What does that look like? That sounds like a super cute little, like sort of normal-sized armadillo when it's a baby. How big are they?
No, they're about the size of a 6-banded armadillo, which I know that doesn't help anybody. But let's say they're from my palm to my elbow, more or less, as a size, and they're soft. Their armor has not been fully formed, so So if you look onto the ICA's website or some of the information, if you go on our social media, there are some images of that. And the truth is, Scott, I have never seen a pup. Everything that you'll find on the media about us, where you see these images, you'll see as much as I've seen because we've recorded them with our camera traps or video camera traps. That's everything we've learned about for these pups. So what we have learned is that giant armadillos are amazing mothers. So they look like this really tough species, but they're really delicate mothers. And they have one pup every 3 to 4 years. So that's why they have such low densities, why they're so rare.
Yeah, that's a slow reproduction rate, yeah.
Very slow reproduction. The pup will nurse for 9 months, be dependent on its mom's burrows for almost 15 months, and then it will stay in its mom's home range from 3 to 4 years before it disperses.
Wow, yeah, that's a lot of parenting.
Yes, and so that means that every giant armadillo is precious because they have such low population growth rates. And so that's really important. So that's something that we always try to share with the local communities and places we work about how rare this species is and how, just the removal of a single individual can have an impact on the population.
And what kind of a role do these giant armadillos play in the Pantanal ecosystem? Is it important that they're there?
So this is what I think. One of the most amazing things about giant armadillos. Here's a species that nobody knows about, nobody really sees, and yet they play a very important role in the ecosystem. They're what we call ecosystem engineers. Ecosystem engineers are animals that modify resources in the environment and that can impact other species. So here in North America, a good example of an ecosystem engineer would be the beaver. Beavers build dams which flood areas, which then create a whole new habitat for lots of other species. And lots of other species depend on that. Well, giant armadillos, they dig these really deep burrows. And nothing else digs burrows such as them. And these burrows are used by lots of other species as a refuge against extreme temperatures. So when it's really hot outside, it's cool inside the burrow. And when it's cold outside, it's warm inside the burrow. It's also a place to seek refuge against predators. It's also a place where, because giant armadillos they dig all these roots, and it's a place to seek food. So lots of insects and roots and seeds to feed on. And then, of course, because it attracts lots of other species, it attracts the predators. We have documented over 80 species using giant armadillo burrows. And so lots of different species. If you put a camera trap in front of a giant armadillo burrow, that's a great way for you to sample the biodiversity and species of vertebrates in the area. And I just had a master's student finish his thesis, and he was looking at the role on invertebrates, and he found that 300 species of invertebrates called giant armadillo burrows their home. You know, he had that control looking at traps for invertebrates outside 50 meters away from giant armadillo burrows in the same habitat. And he really demonstrated. So giant armadillo burrows provide homes for other species. They're very important. This is a species, you know, that few people know about, understand, and yet it's providing a huge service to biodiversity. And that's one of the arguments to conserve this species. It helps maintain and create a healthy ecosystem.
So what are some of the threats that giant armadillos are facing? I mean, here in Texas, we I think, unfortunately, we most often see armadillos dead on the side of the road. Is that the case in the Pantanal as well?
Well, the Pantanal itself doesn't really have any roads, right? It's more these dirt roads. We have one big highway that crosses the south of the Pantanal, a small section. But the fact is, giant armadillos are so rare that you don't really see giant armadillo carcasses. But wildlife vehicle collisions is a big issue in the state where I live, Mato Grosso do Sul. And that's an issue that we're working on. We've been working on for the past 10 years, of course, yeah. But for giant armadillos, I think every biome and every different place where we work, there are different threats. Interestingly, in the Pantanal, there is very little hunting. There is no culture of hunting. I think one of the reasons for this is just the abundance of meat, right? We said the Pantanal, the main and practically only economic activity is extensive cattle ranching. And since you've been in the Pantanal, you know we have meat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so they're certainly not a protein-starved population. And there is now some habitat conversion that is happening where landowners are changing. The traditional pantaneros are selling their land to people that work outside of Brazil, outside of the Pantanal, maybe from the south, São Paulo, and they tend to want to deforest areas to increase the carrying capacity, to plant more grass, to be able to have more cattle. So habitat conversion is starting to become a big concern. But one of the main threats that we are working on is fire. And you might have heard in 2020, we had catastrophic fires in the Pantanal. These fires that went out of control. And 1/3 of the Pantanal was burnt.
Wow.
And that was absolutely catastrophic. And so what we did when the fire started, our project, the Giant Armadillo Conservation Program, 80% of our funding comes from zoos in North America and Europe. And before you ask, there are no giant armadillos in zoos. But zoos are committed to conservation. And so when there were these catastrophic fires, our zoo partners actually got in touch with us and said, how can we help? And so at first, with the funds we had, we spent on rescue efforts, funding fire brigades, but then talking with the landowner in Desbiez where we work. In Desbiez, we had experienced a big fire the year before. And basically, the community just comes, takes branches, and tries to beat the fire. But here we were seeing these fire brigades extinguishing fires. And so that's when the idea was born to create a community fire brigade. And so thanks to the sponsorship of lots of zoos in North America and Europe, we were able to create a community-run fire brigade. And so in 2021, we worked with 7 ranches, and which we fully equipped with all the most modern equipment you would need to combat fires. And we brought firefighters to train them. And we do this training now every year. And so in 2021, there were 7 ranches participating. 2022, 15 ranches participating. And last year, we had 22 ranches participating in this community fire brigade. So it's been growing. And now we cover an area of 600 square miles. And we haven't had a catastrophic fire since then. So it has been working. However, this year being an El Nino year, we are very concerned. There has not been a flooded season. We are already at in a drought situation where we should be in a flooded situation. So we are very, very concerned. And this community fire brigade, so 22 ranches, has also really helped us expand our message of conservation for the giant armadillos, of course, yeah. And this work is done in partnership also with the Lowland Tapir Project. These are both funded by the Houston Zoo and participate. And so it's really been a great way to talk about species conservation, in a way that, and also be useful for the community.
This is Wild World. When we come back, we'll hear more about Arnaud Desbiez' work to protect wild animals that live in South America's Pantanal.
To support this Wild World podcast, please check out Autio. It's an app that gives you amazing stories told by some of the world's best storytellers, such as John Lithgow, Phil Jackson, and Kevin Costner, and it's uniquely curated based on your location. It's a perfect audio travel companion for any road trip or just learning more about a trip you want to take. Click on the link in our show notes for more information.
This is Wild World. I'm Scott Solomon, and we're discussing a wild part of South America known as the Pantanal. My guest is Arnaud Desbiez. So you also work with another species that I am fascinated by. This one I have had a chance to see in the wild, and that's giant anteaters. They're just so cool. I mean, every time that I have been lucky enough to see one when I've been out in South America, I just get like so excited because it seems like, let's be honest, it's kind of a strange looking creature, but I just think they're amazing. I mean, they've got these long snouts and this just enormous bushy tail, right? And they're incredible. Tell me a little more about them.
Well, you're absolutely right. Giant anteaters are such a weird looking species, but at the same time, extremely majestic. I mean, they look like nothing else. As you said, they have this really long tubular nose from which this really long tongue can dart out. They walk on their knuckles like a gorilla.
Yeah, kind of weird, right?
They're very strong. And yeah, they have this huge bushy tail. And that's why actually in Portuguese, we call them tamanduá bandeira. Bandeira means flag, yeah.
Yeah, the tails look like a giant waving flag as they're walking. And they move pretty fast, right? I mean, when I've seen them, at least, maybe they're running away from me, but they seem like they move faster than I expect them to.
They can be fast. I think they're about the speed of a person, running. Because we catch them by putting them in a net, right?
Really?
Like a huge net when we want to capture them. And so, they do. I want to say that they never outran me, but they have, yeah.
I'm picturing a giant butterfly net, but I'm guessing it's something a little more.
Yeah, it is. That's exactly what it's like, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So it's like a giant butterfly net, but of course, really reinforced and strong. And usually we go two people. He kind of runs into the net, and then he's inside, and then the second person comes. The animal gets into the net, and then we apply an anesthetic, yeah.
My experience is they don't have terribly good eyesight, right? I mean, they often you can get closer than you would be able to other animals, I guess because of their eyesight. Is that right?
Yeah, they have very poor eyesight. And armadillos and anteaters in general have poor eyesight. But they have an incredible sense of smell, and they can hear very well.
I think my most memorable experience with the smaller type of anteater, they call the tamanduá, right? The one that goes up in trees. I remember being in Costa Rica one time, and one of them came down the tree and started walking in my direction. And I guess it didn't see me until it got within just a few feet away. And then suddenly it either saw me or smelled me or whatever. But it stood up, and they do that anteater thing where they put their arms out to the side to try to, I think it's to try to look big and intimidating, right? But to me, it just looked like it wanted to give me a big hug.
Exactly. It looks like they want, pick me up and give me a hug. But actually, even the small tamanduá, they have these really sharp claws.
Yes, they do.
And so now giant anteaters will swipe at you. They don't really get on their hind legs. They'll kind of retract. They can kind of get back. But they won't do that exact position as the tamanduá. But yeah, that's a defensive posture, and that means do not get close. But I agree with you. They look adorable, and you want to give them a hug.
I do want to give them a hug. So tell me a little bit about the kind of work that you do with these giant anteaters. These are an animal that I have unfortunately seen as roadkill on the side of the highway in Brazil. That's got to be a threat to them.
Yes. So, and you're absolutely right. So we started working with giant anteaters, first in the Pantanal, studying their ecology, biology, as we did with giant armadillos. But the main threat we're looking at, and that we've been focusing on for over 10 years now, has been the threat of wildlife vehicle collisions. And so giant anteaters are one of the most killed animals on the roads in Mato Grosso do Sul. We have data now. We did lots of wildlife monitoring on the roads counting. When we did this monitoring, so you drive in your car, not too fast, and you count carcasses, take GPS positions. When we did this work, doing these surveys every 2 weeks, we saw that there were 19 individual giant anteaters dead on the side of the road for every 100 kilometers per year. However, those surveys were done every 2 weeks. So then we did the surveys every day to see if we were missing out on animals. And we saw that, we're missing about 25% of the carcasses. Wow. And that's just because, rain or animals drag the carcass off and things like that. So we have also placed radio collars on giant anteaters. And we placed now, I guess it will be more than 70 collars on different animals. And some of our animals have perished being hit by cars, trucks, or vehicles. What's interesting is more than half of these animals that were hit, they go and die a little bit further off the road. They manage to drag themselves off the road. And so actually, if the number of animals on the side of the road is frightening to you, that's only the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Over half of those animals go and drag themselves and die away. And we know that, we have the data. We know that they die 24 to 48 hours later, right next to the road. But that means you can't see them when you're driving because of the vegetation. So putting these two studies, right, the persistence study and the telemetry study together, it turns out that it's not 19 giant anteaters dying per year per 100 kilometers. It's 40 giant anteaters dying per year on 100 kilometers of paved road. Yeah. So these are huge numbers.
That's a lot. That's a really high
number. That's a lot of animals. And that's why these roads are acting as what we call population sinks. So it's, if you imagine you're a sink and you open the drain and all the water comes out, that's the role the highway is doing. It's sucking animals outside of other habitats. It's making them disappear. And of course, it's not just giant anteaters. It's lots of other species, the tapirs, the foxes, the armadillos, the big cats. All of our biodiversity, they're animals that I had never seen in the wild that I've seen dead on the road. So it's a really huge problem.
Yeah.
But what our work has shown, Scott, and where our project has been able to make a lot of progress is demonstrating that this is not just a problem for biodiversity. People die on our roads. No. The problem of anteaters being killed is a problem, meaning of collisions, vehicle collisions. That means that there's a person that hit the animal, and that person can die, be paralyzed, get injured, or even sometimes just when the animal crosses and you swerve.
Right.
And so that's why in the project we now speak of wildlife vehicle collisions and not of roadkill. And the mission of the project, Anteaters and Highways, is to make roads safe for all. And sometimes when you make a partnership, so in this case with the local authorities, the state authorities that are responsible for managing the roads, for this partnership to work, we had to change our vocabulary and the way that we talk about this issue. Not tell them about the giant anteaters dying and boohoo. No, we had to talk about collisions that are threatening the lives of the road users. And that we need to find a solution to that because people are dying on a road. And that's a political problem. And then with our data, because we collected lots of data, we can predict where there are collision hotspots. The authorities now have maps for the highways in the state where there's a high probability of these collisions happening. We know the solutions. What work is fences linked to underpasses. Our telemetry data with the anteaters showed that underpasses without fencing, only 1% of the giant anteaters used the underpasses. So you need fences to guide them. So we know the problem, we know the issue, and now we started communicating a lot with the population, people to know, so that people don't think that, wildlife collisions, it's just a tragedy. No, this is a predictable tragedy. It will happen, and the authorities are not doing anything. So we kind of have this role where we're telling the people, no, revolt because the roads are not safe for you but even though there are solutions. And then with the authorities, we're like, look, we could do this and this, and working with them to create these solutions. So that's where the project's at right now.
I mean, it's amazing because there aren't always these examples in conservation where the interests of the species that you're trying to protect are so well aligned with the interests of the local people living in the area. But this sounds like a case of that, right? What's good for the people is good for the wildlife as well.
But Scott, in this, so I don't think we mentioned it, but I'm participating in the Zoos and Aquariums Committing to Conservation Conference, where lots of different conservationists are here. And you'll see that a lot of the projects that have been working for many years, for over a few decades, all these projects, they really started to protect a species. So the person got in there and tried to save species. And then you'll see that they started making partnerships with local people, local authorities, key stakeholders. And now all these projects are actually working for people. And that there are ways and our interests are in common. The final goal is the same. And so what's important in conservation is finding ways for your interests and the local communities, the stakeholders, the people around you, for your interests to align so that you can work together for a goal, interpret the problems, think together so that we find the solutions together. And that's what this conservation is all about.
This is Wild World. I'm Scott Solomon. I'm talking with Arnaud Desbiez. When we come back, we'll hear more about Arnaud's work to protect animals like giant anteaters and giant armadillos in South America's Pantanal.
To support this Wild World podcast, please check out Autio. It's an app that gives you amazing stories told by some of the world's best storytellers, such as John Lithgow, Phil Jackson, and Kevin Costner, and it's uniquely curated based on your location. It's a perfect audio travel companion for any road trip or just learning more about a trip you want to take. Click on the link in our show notes for more information.
This is Wild World. I'm Scott Solomon, and we're discussing a wild part of South America known as the Pantanal. My guest is Arnaud Desbiez.
So, Arnaud, you live and work in Brazil now, as I understand it, but you're originally from France, is that correct?
Yes, so I was actually born in the urban jungle of Paris, yes. But we lived half in France and half in the United States. So I don't have that awful accent that French people have usually when they attempt to butcher English.
You don't have a French accent at all, no.
No, because I was born we lived in New York, yeah.
Okay.
But I don't have a New York accent. Yeah. Thank God, yeah. But and I went to university at McGill University in Canada. So
a truly international person, indeed.
But I've always been passionate about animals and wildlife. So how did I get into this kind of work? Well, I studied zoology. And then I actually started my career as a zookeeper. And then little by little got interested in learning more about animals in the wild. Back in the days when I started my career, almost 30 years ago, zoos were not really involved in wildlife conservation. And so I started trying to learn more. And then I lived and worked in Belize, Argentina, Bolivia, Nepal also for a while, and then ended up going to do my PhD in Brazil, in the Pantanal, looking at the influence of pigs and peccaries, the exotic pigs' impact on native peccaries. Well, then I met my wife and fell in love, got married, and ended up staying in Brazil.
Well, I can understand that. My wife is Brazilian, and we lived in Brazil for a little while. It's a wonderful country and a beautiful culture. So yeah, what a great place to be. So when you were a kid, were you like really into animals? Was this like your dream job to work with wild animals, or were you interested in other things?
Scott, I've always been kind of obsessed by animals. I've always loved animals, but I never imagined that I could have such a career. my family always worked in business. And so I was never exposed to any of these possibilities. So it was really going to university and then participating in a few congresses and getting to know some people. It was really word of mouth that the world started opening up to me. This brilliant primatologist called Robert Horwich gave me the opportunity to work in Belize on howler monkeys. And so it was really getting to know people, volunteering and having a chance that I was able to learn about all these things. But as a kid, I mean, I never imagined that I would be doing what I do today. And I'm grateful for it every day. And if I was to give any advice to teenagers or youngsters listening to us and that are interested in getting into conservation and wildlife conservation or saving species in the wild, I would say figure out what it is that you love to do and something that you're good at and you love to do. Because to work in conservation, you don't need to be a field biologist like I am, or you don't need to be a veterinarian. Conservation is such a multidisciplinary science that you could be an artist. We need artists to portray our wildlife and inspire people. We need communicators. If we could communicate about wildlife conservation the way McDonald's does about their Happy Meals and their specials, we would not be in this position. We need lawyers, environmental laws. We need people fighting for us for public policies. We need teachers. So the field of wildlife conservation is extremely diverse. So find out what you're good at. What are your skills? And I'm sure that there are ways to apply that to conservation. And to get into this field, this is a field where it's great to know people. And so, I would say go volunteer at your local zoo, see what's going on, talk to the people there, try to talk to as many people as you can to find out what's out there and the possibility. So, follow your passion, follow what you're good at. Don't think that, I'm not good in science. So no, any skill that you have can be applied.
So, yeah. I know that you work with a number of different organizations, and including the Houston Zoo. Can you talk a little bit about what that partnership looks like, and what are the ways that you guys work together?
The Houston Zoo funds 35 projects such as ours, right? So we're just one of many. They work in Africa, Asia, you name it. They kind of work there on all kinds of different species. And their projects are also long-term projects that the zoo is very involved in. And I'll give some examples of how the zoo is not only involved in financing these projects, but building capacity, finding solutions. But I think one of the things that we have in common in these 35 projects funded by the Houston Zoo is that we all work have very close partnerships with our stakeholders, local communities, authorities, and work in a diversity of ways. And so I love when I talk to some of the staff at the Houston Zoo, because these people are experienced in finding solutions in Borneo or West Tanzania, and they have experience of things that then sometimes can apply to us. So it's this incredible knowledge. The Houston Zoo has been funding us since 2013, and today they're one of our biggest financial partners. But the support of the Houston Zoo has gone way beyond that. The Houston Zoo staff and they develop a very close relationships with their partners. And so we often have long discussions about where the project is going. They help us to be strategic in the work we do and in planning. And so they've always been very, very, very helpful in that sense. I would like to say the parts where Houston Zoo has helped me the most is in the capacity building of my staff. So I want to give the example of this biologist, Gabriel Massocato, who has been working with me since 2011. He barely spoke any English, and so he was working with us. The Houston Zoo adopted him, and they sponsored his salary, and then they invited him to the zoo to get to know him. They had this really cool program called Wildlife Warriors, where the staff, maybe some of the people you'd never imagine being involved in conservation in the zoo. And that's one of the cool things at the Houston Zoo is the culture of conservation. So people at the tills, when you come into the Houston Zoo, they would tell you, would you like to buy a bracelet for $2 to go for conservation? And then they pull that money together, and then the staff would decide on who would win this award. And then so Gabriel won this Wildlife Warrior Award, and then he came for 2 months to the Houston Zoo to be trained in education, in communication, data management, how to present himself, et cetera, et cetera. And he also, he had English classes in the morning. So the zoo sponsored his English classes in the morning, and then afternoon he would go through different sections of the zoo learning. And that has been such a transformative experience.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. I can't express enough how much the help of the Houston Zoo has been transformative for my team. This investment in people, because conservation is people, this investment in people has made the difference.
I mean, that's so great to hear, because I know one of the slogans for the Houston Zoo is "See them, save them," right? This idea that when you go and visit the zoo, the money that you spend there, part of that is going directly to support conservation efforts around the world, and including yours. So it's really great to hear like specific examples of the ways in which that money is actually making an impact. And I mean, you can go and you can see the Pantanal exhibit. I mean, it's actually one of my favorite exhibits in the zoo. And they do have giant anteaters there, don't they?
And they also have a sculpture of a giant armadillo.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It's incredible. And when they built this exhibit, the team actually came to the field, spent time with us, learned about the environment, spoke to the landowners, and really got to immerse themselves in the landscape with the people, the plants, the animals, to provide, people of Houston with this incredible experience. I even brought to Houston a lot of the stuff the cowboys use, the gear the cowboys use. So to bring, we also share, lots of our field work materials. And so it's really based, this exhibit is based on the projects. And that concept has been extended to the Galapagos and lots of other projects. And so I think this idea, so really when you go to the Houston Zoo, you should have a good day out and take the kids out, have fun, but you can really learn something, and you are contributing to conservation just by going to the zoo. Sometimes I hear, and I know that there's some anti-zoo movements, and some people get a little bit angry that, animals are confined. And I'm inviting on people, if there are any animal rights people on this podcast that are listening to this and that have any anti-zoo feelings, come visit the field with me. Come spend a few days walking in my shoes and seeing what animals in the wild are going through now. The giant anteaters are being run over, burned by fire. Agriculture is expanding. We're losing habitat. There are fires. There are so many threats to animals in the wild. People do not realize that the wild is not a Disney movie, and it's rough out there. So we reintroduced these orphan giant anteaters. Mothers have been killed on the roads. The survival rate of our anteaters after 2 years is 50%, always man-made threats. We're having a hard time sometimes finding habitats to put these animals back in the wild. So if you are anti-zoo, please go to the Houston Zoo. And if you're still anti-zoo, come spend a few days with me and look at the life of the animals. These animals at the Houston Zoo, I guarantee you, they have better health care than you and I have, Scott, and probably a better diet. It's incredible what the amount of care that is put into these animals. So I thought it's an important message to talk about when we talk about zoos.
That's great. I'm so impressed by the work that you're doing and the passion that you bring to it as well. So thanks so much for sharing your story and your experience. And thanks for being a guest on Wild World.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, Scott.
That's it for this episode.
To find out more about Arnaud Desbiez' work in the Pantanal, go to giantanteater.org. If you're in the Houston area, check out the Houston Zoo's exhibit, South America's Pantanal, where you can see giant anteaters and other animals that call the Pantanal home up close. They've also got an anaconda, tapirs, a jaguar, and more. It's one of my favorite places in the zoo, and Arnaud actually helped to design the exhibit. Go to houstonzoo.org to learn more and to get tickets.
We'll also have links on our website, wildworldshow.com. You can listen to Wild World anywhere you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media at Wild World Show. This episode of Wild World was produced by 3Wire Creative. I'm Scott Solomon. Join me next time as we explore another part of our wild world.